Technology for Good. Author Jim Fruchterman in conversation. Speaker Jim Fruchterman, author and CEO, Tech Matters. Moderator Larry Goldberg, accessibility sensei and technology consultant.
Hi, this is Larry Goldberg here with Jim Fruchterman. We want to thank SiteTech Global for giving us a few minutes to talk about some pretty interesting developments in the field of technology and accessibility and assistive tech. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Larry, great to see you.
Great to see you. Now, before we dig in, I want to talk about the most exciting startup I've heard of launch in the past year, and that is the Dovetail Bakery in Queens.
Yay, my daughter's bakery.
Fantastic. And I'm looking out my window in New York right now, and I can see Queens, so I'm going to get over there.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's
Thank
great.
you. You know, the better part of my family.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you love to question conventional wisdom. So, let's dig into a few provocative things you brought up in your recent book. Your book is great, just came out a month and a half ago, 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And it's pretty exciting, and people really need to read it. But why don't you do a little promo for your book right now?
Well, obviously, I dropped out of the regular Silicon Valley AI scene to start a nonprofit tech company that people know as Benetech. And it was such a great experience for me to move away from, I call it, from money to meaning. And as my career has progressed, I have found hundreds of nonprofits that are using technology to make a difference. And no one had written a book on how to start a deliberately nonprofit tech company. And so I thought there should be at least one book on how to deliberately lose money as a tech startup.
And so you have. So yeah, well, my first question was, have you gotten any pushback from some of those nonprofits or even the dinosaurs that you talk about that kind of need to go away?
The dinosaurs aren't reading my book, right? And the joke in my thing is like, and the accessibility industry was kind of like has had this issue is that programs that were great in the 1950s maybe didn't serve people so well in the 1990s or the 2010s, right? And yet in the nonprofit sector, there's a conservatism preserving the way we did things in the past approach, and that tech innovation is often put in the back burner. I mean, the Library of Congress was shipping audio cassette tapes through the mail 25 years after the audio cassette tape went obsolete, right? So I think my belief is that people with disabilities, actually ordinary people, deserve the best technology as opposed to stuff that was, from their parents' or grandparents' era.
Yeah, I felt some pain there. I've been in the captioning business for many, many years, and it was very analog and manual to start. And then some smart disruptors came around and started using hybrid technology, combo of machines and humans. And it was really disruptive to the captioning industry. And running a nonprofit, we had to be concerned about, can we keep up? Can we invest the necessary finances and resources to deliver? And you talk about that a lot in your book.
Well, I think one of the things that, and I think that when you get to the heart of it, the goal is to serve the people we serve. It is not to preserve the living that we have or the organization we have. And when organizational preservation starts taking precedence over the interests of the people you serve, things are going wrong. But the way people are funded often causes these sort of divergences. But I know that the people who really innovate in a field tend to be the people who have been on the front lines, see the good and the bad of how things are being done today, and try to imagine how to do it better. And I want to help equip those people to be more successful, whether they choose to start a purpose-driven for-profit or a nonprofit that's sort of more disruptive and technically capable.
Well, I think we can feel good about the fact that a lot of the young people coming into the business now are digital natives. Of course, they're going to use some great tools. They're not going to use some of the pedals we used to have to push to make this tech work. Now, one of the really interesting questions around being a nonprofit and trying to be a good business is that your customers are not necessarily your users. And that is a tough dichotomy. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about being in business is you're you're dependent on your customer paying you to be successful, and so you have an alignment. But whereas in the nonprofit sector, often we have what is called third-party payers. Sometimes happens in healthcare as well, where the people paying the bill are not the people who actually need the service, and then you get these sort of divergences. Now, you know, I think that you still should be treating your user, your community member, your beneficiary, just like they were a customer. And I think that that tends to create a more positive thing as opposed to spending all your time kissing up to the funder. But those are both valid strategies. I just happen to lean towards if we do the best for the person we're serving, we can usually convince the payers that that's best for them. And but we have to be cost effective. We can't just say, well, we can spend an infinite amount of money having, a gold-plated product. We don't have that option. We have to exist in the real world. But people first, efficiency second is usually the way I'd like it to go, if that's at all possible.
You talk in your book about sometimes board members can be kind of retrograde. They want you to just stick to the old mission and do the same old, same old. You've spent a lot of time in your life educating board members and funders to get with the program. So how did you pull that off?
Well, again, you have to go back to the first principles is, why are we here? What is our mission? Is it organizational preservation or is it actually serving people? And I end up advising nonprofit leaders on how to convince recalcitrant board members, how to shift them, how to make the case. And I think one of the things that I'm currently advocating for, and I'm one of the advisors to, is something called board.dev. The idea that every nonprofit needs a tech person on the board, just like traditionally they needed a lawyer and a finance type on the board, because the need to become savvy with technology is critical. And if you have someone who comes from the tech industry, but has been educated on being respectful of the culture of the social good sector, that and then work on the people who are in the social good sector to begin to understand the benefits of technology, I think bringing the best of both those worlds will come up with whatever the next generation should be. Because standing still is not an option. And if you think about the nonprofit sector today, which is needs are going up and funding is going down, one of the few things that I know that allows you to do, more with less money is technology. And so I wish it wasn't the case that we needed it because it's a crisis, but still, it's a pretty good path. And I think more and more nonprofits are realizing that they have to start emulating the business sector in using technology to become more efficient. Because social demand is often there. If you can serve 40% more people with the same staff, you really should try to do that.
Yeah. I don't know if I made up this phrase, but I repeat it all the time, and that is embrace change because it's coming anyway.
Yep.
And you don't have much of a choice. And probably more radical and more rapid these days than ever. You and I met probably back in the days when Benetech was getting started and Bookshare.
Mm-hmm.
And Benetech has always relied significantly on government funding.
Mm-hmm.
So how are they doing now? This is a major pivot for a company.
Well, the thing is, we didn't rely on government funding for the first 15 years. This is, we were primarily a social enterprise that for the first 10 years, we existed on revenue. We had no donors and no government funding. Now, the VA was one of our larger customers, but it was still a minority of everything. It was when we got the big contract for Bookshare in the mid 2000s that things turned. And yes, right now, Benetech has been as much as 80% government funded and is desperately trying to get that number down because it's, but I actually have good news is, we're now talking in, late fall 2025, the fiscal year for the feds ended, and Bookshare got another year of money and got an extra couple $1 million to work on AI accessibility. So, and people were like, well, the current administration gave you extra money. Well, sometimes things work out that way. So now I still think Benetech is working on reducing their dependence on federal funding, but it's been a very powerful engine that's paid for a lot of technology development around accessibility, especially of STEM subjects. It's not clear that you could have gotten millions of dollars from private donors to do that, though they have gotten a few million dollars from private donors to work on STEM accessibility.
Well, it's great to hear occasional good news stories like that. I was down at Gallaudet not long ago, and they got a major NSF grant to train PhD students on use of AI to benefit the deaf community.
Mhm.
And it was a brand new grant. I was like, this is great news. So little bits here and there.
I think
Good to
AI is
know about.
popular with the current administration, but often
Mm,
that means other people are suffering, like personnel prep and things that are still,
mm.
just as important. But well, we work on the things we can.
Yeah. Well, it's been a whole 10 minutes since we started talking, and we just now brought up AI. I guess it's time we get into it.
Yeah.
So, with some of the longer term companies that have been around for a while, and then some of these startups, there's good news and bad news there too. And I think we both recognize it's been way overhyped. I think a lot of people are recognizing that. So, give me your perspective on how these nonprofits can harness it and avoid some of the harms.
Well, I started my first for-profit AI company in 1982, so it's been a while. Um, and and AI always makes mistakes. I mean, everyone knows that who actually pays attention to what AI is doing. And so last year, I published the nonprofit AI treasure map. How does the average nonprofit leader figure out what to do with AI? And the essence of it is wait till there's a product, test it out, and it saves you more time than it costs you in terms of fixing the errors. Use it. It's that simple. And people try to like lose their moorings, like, oh, it's magic and it's going to solve all of our problems. No, it's just the latest in a steady march of better and better AI technology. I mean, the funny thing is, like, I was working on AI. Character recognition used to be called AI. When we started Benetech and we made reading machines for blind people, that was the leading edge of AI back in the day. And one of the cool things that people forget is that every generation of AI that came along for people with disabilities has led to products that now people take advantage of every day. If I go travel to Portugal, I was in Portugal last week, and I want to see what the Chiron on the TV is saying, I just hold up my phone and it does OCR on the TV and it tells me what this news story is about. I mean, that was technology that used to cost, $50,000 from Kurzweil at one point, $5,000 from Arkenstone/Benetech, and now it's built into my phone for free. So I'm really excited, and of course, this current generation of AI is going to do all sorts of great accessibility things, but it's going to make some mistakes. And so if you can put up with the mistakes, then you're probably going to like it.
Yeah, I everyone talks about the curb cut effect. I refer to the closed captioning effect because the mainstream use of this technology invented for people with disabilities and shared with the world is where one of the great successes have. And I think I wound up in there by pure luck. But I wish that all of these accessible technologies we're looking at could find their mainstream footing and be assured of their sustainability. And some of what you talked about is right there.
Well, I mean, character recognition, voice synthesis, voice recognition, captioning, these are all things that so many people take advantage of. And and frankly, I like to think that a lot of the work that Benetech and other people are doing around using AI in education are going to benefit every kid in education for all the same reasons. Having an AI who actually understands how to say math equations is going to be helpful to a lot of kids who don't have a qualifying disability.
You bring up this issue of, is good enough a quality bar we should be aiming for, or better than nothing. So I'm working with a startup now that is providing human sign language interpreting for entertainment videos online, sign up media. But everyone wants to rush into signing avatars
Mm-hmm.
and using robots or animated characters to do sign language. There's not enough sign language around, better than nothing, but people are rushing into this long before I would consider and the deaf community considers it's ready for prime time. And I think that's one of the examples that you're talking about.
Well, and realize our early OCR products weren't that good, right?
Mm.
And the average blind consumer said, "This is not, it's not worth what I would have to pay for it." and it got better and better over time. And, but, the miracle of Bookshare was someone scanned it and someone else proofread it. But, that meant 3,000 people didn't have to scan it and all have a raw OCR version. So, and how many times have signing avatars been invented? I saw my first one 25 years ago, right? And it's still not ready for prime time. But, it's great that people keep trying. And one of these days we're going to get it down. But ultimately, it's really up to the consumer to say, this is not a product that I would pay for. And if they feel that way, then the third party payers shouldn't end up paying for it just because they can.
Luckily, we've got one benefit of social media is that consumers can push back and say, oh, this is terrible. Please stop. And it's good to see that. Like one deaf guy was inventing the term craptions. And I was like, that affected a lot of people. Yes, it did. So in your book, you talk about some bad ideas. And of course, we love to hear about bad ideas too. Could you talk a little bit about that in the nonprofit world?
Well, I mean, one of my examples, I have a series of, the one true list is one of my examples where you're going to build a giant database in the sky. And it used to be called Able Data, right? And,
Yeah.
search engines beat Yahoo, Google beats Able Data. And it went away because it turns out that building one list to rule them all is really hard and really expensive. And my thesis is that these are things that fail 95 or 98% of the time. And what I try to highlight is what is an example of a one true list that actually worked? What makes it different? Why did Able Data fail and Wikipedia succeed? But I mean, some of the other things I talk about, the app that no one will download, the latest fad. I mean, 7 years ago, everyone was dropping everything for blockchain. And, how much is blockchain changing the average person's life? Not much. Metaverse, Facebook renamed itself Meta. Oops, no one's using that. So now the great thing about AI is we're on like the fourth fad. And if you bought everything that each one of those fads was going to do with AI, most of them failed. But hey, the AI projects only fail 80 or 90% of the time instead of, 99% of the time or more. So I'm kind of an optimist about how this stuff actually works out. But by just cautioning people against it, the biggest issue that people run into with tech for good is they think of what people should want instead of what they actually want. And a classic example from the blindness field was the reinvention over and over again of the Braille keyboard. We're going to put Braille dots on every key because blind people are so stupid they can't find keys. They're like, well, what blind people do is they learn to touch type, and there are two little dots on two of the keys, like they are for everybody else, and blind people do just fine. And people, and they still don't get it. And they're like, okay, see that screen? Do you want to pound your head into that screen repeatedly? That's what a Braille keyboard will feel like to a Braille reader. Don't do this. And yet people are so, but I've invented this. It's like, no, you've reinvented it and it didn't work because it was not craptions, but it was in that direction. An idea that people didn't want. And if you don't listen to the consumer, you're going to spend money and a lot of time doing something that's useless. You really have to pay attention to what people actually want.
Well, there's a lot of folks in the blind community, particularly the techies, who roll their eyes or literally when they say, here we go again, a better white cane. Like, my white cane is fine. Why do you keep trying to invent something new?
Yeah.
And, some of them are friends of SciTech, and that's okay. But let's hear what the users say.
Well, yeah. I mean, and there are some users, there's always users who love something. And if your business can survive on selling 1,000 or 5,000 units a year of something, that's probably pretty expensive. Well, consumers should have that choice. But some of these
You have to
things
worry
didn't
about
actually work. I mean, how many times
sustainability.
have people invented the finger spelling hand?
I was going to bring that one up. Yeah. And it's funny because it'll be these kids, undergraduates in a science course, and they're so proud of themselves. And you got to feel like, good for you, good for you. Now go find something else to do. But yeah, we've seen that one.
It's it's an educational experience to build a product. It's an educational experience to have people throw up on your product. And actually, that's a great experience to have if you actually want to become an entrepreneur. Is, I mean, my joke is I started 7 for-profit, companies in Silicon Valley, and only 5 of them failed. And since I started Benetech, I mean, I've built 30 products. At least 20 of them failed. Hey, that's a pretty good track record.
I was looking at, 51% is a winning record.
Yeah.
That means 49% is failing. Pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people these days, particularly in the big corporations, are so relieved that things are going on in Europe to counter a lot of the bad things going on here, like the European Accessibility Act. You've had a real perspective on the international picture and the US versus what's going on in so many other countries. Can you talk about a little bit of that contrast?
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-edged sword, right? I mean, the tech industry says, oh, we're more innovative in the US because we have fewer controls. We also have kids committing suicide on chatbots because we have fewer controls. So it goes both ways, but we are often inventing things sooner, and so that's kind of good. We also have some policy innovations that aren't bad. I mean, one of the things I got to work on was the Treaty of Marrakesh. The idea that we took a very American copyright exception, the Chafee Amendment, that made Bookshare possible, and we made it a global norm. And so, but what I really admire people working on social issues around things like privacy, like accessibility, like safety by design, child safety by design. The Europeans are all way ahead of the Americans, and I wish we had more accessibility regulations with teeth than we do today. And I think a lot of the progress that we have made in the US has been because we actually did have regulations that people took seriously. And I hope that we don't lose that and that we continue to steadily make progress on raising the bar of what accessibility work is required of government and business.
Well, I think there's a lot of pivot going on. I'm certainly doing it and not look to Washington, but look to the states.
Mhm.
These days, look to the states. I live in both Massachusetts and New York. I've got 2 lovely bubbles I live in, and they are making movements. And we can feel good about what's going on there, and that can be replicated as Colorado and California and many other areas in the US.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is that you also have conservative states that are often doing some cool innovation, not necessarily inspired by, I don't know, more liberal objectives. It's just like, hey, this is a job we got to do, and if we can do it better, we will, and for less money, let's do that. I mean, one of the startups I talk about in the book is a group called Recidiviz that works with Republican and democratically led states and says, we can save you money and preserve public safety by getting a lot of people out of prison. And you already have the data and you already have the laws. We don't need to change anything. You just have to take advantage of the fact that these people could be at a lower level of incarceration that saves the taxpayer money. That's a popular message to a lot of people. I mean, I always had really good luck selling Bookshare on Capitol Hill to Republicans and Democrats. Why? Because we had 1,000 kids in every congressional district, and everyone, well, a very small minority didn't believe the government should do anything, right? But an awful lot of people are like, hey, kids with disabilities deserve an equal shot, and you're doing it 10 times more cost effectively than books on tape sent through the mail. So yeah, let's go for that. So I don't know, but yes, often you can make a lot of progress at the state level when things in federal land aren't really moving forward that fast.
You just talked about some of the data you use to convince people. Can we rely on data still? I'm a little worried about that's your data. No, that's not my data. I don't interpret it that way. Is there ground truth?
It's this weird sort of thing. It's like if you're in tech and you're using data to figure out what it costs you to acquire a customer or what your lifetime, rewards for having a customer, no one debates whether that data is valid because their livelihoods depend on it. So we have this culture where, data in business is holy and where data in science is increasingly questioned, right? So I don't know. I'm a data guy. I mean, data's got its pros and cons, but I mean, you know, in God we trust, but everyone else bring data.
And the data you're talking about that is in business is really what the for-profit people will never turn their back on. Look, my bottom line, my quarterly results, I know what I got.
Yeah.
What
And
worries me sometimes is saying, well, if you make your website more accessible, it'll improve your bottom line. It's like, I haven't seen that data.
some of these things are hard to do, and some of them you do for civil rights reasons. But we always try to make both cases, and sometimes that case works. Sometimes the data is elusive, and but I think in general, more data that is more authentic is scoring with the majority of policymakers. So, I mean, right now we operate 911 for kids in 20 countries. And because often in a country, there actually is a 911 number, a 3 or 4 digit number that is for kids
Mm.
in crisis. And those helplines, because we built the technology that they run their helpline on, that they now are the authorities on what things kids are running into in the country, and they're independent of business. And policymakers are a little leery about self-reported data from the tech industry, and they have a reason to, because if you have an interest in what data you report, you may not report all the data you actually have. And so having an independent check on, well, gee, cyberbullying seems to be a much bigger issue when kids call in crisis than industry is telling us. So, I mean, I do think that more data, carefully framed, not overstated as representing more than what it says, is better than flying without data.
On that authenticity and trust in particular is something that you raise is essential for anyone trying to start a business, nonprofit or for profit.
Yeah, but it's especially true of the nonprofit sector where the currency is more trust than money. And I think the great thing about the accessibility industry is it does run on trust, and when people lose the trust of their customers, they get themselves in deep trouble. We have a tech industry that is dominated by people who are not trustworthy, and it doesn't seem to be hurting their bottom line. And that is making them feel pretty darn invincible about continuing to exploit our data. And I'm hoping that the the good guys and gals are, going to make more progress by having more trustworthy products. And I think, just to make an example, Apple gets more credit for being, you know, protective of your privacy in certain ways that other people aren't. And I love it when people are doing that.
And I hope the rest will see the chickens come home to roost. It feels like that's going to happen. So you close your book with a clarion call to go do tech for good.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, and we of course have been doing that our whole lives. Beyond AI, what's your advice as a closing words for people who are thinking, okay, what's next? What can I do to have a good social impact?
There are so many things that are out there that aren't going to make you a billionaire, right? And I joke,
Hey, a
people who
million
move,
would be fine.
um,
That
you
would be
know,
fine.
you know, but a lot of people want to move from big money to big meaning and make a living. And what I tell people is, acquire the skills of whatever is your dream, right? Whether it's a technologist or a product designer or a marketer or whatever it is, acquire those skills. And then when you have a dream of something that could actually make society better, make humanity better, make the planet better, and you figure out it's not going to make me a boatload of money, you don't give up on it. You actually sit back and go, no, wait a minute. I need to get a copy of Jim Fruchterman's book to tell me how to actually do that. But there are hundreds of examples of people who have managed to make this pivot, make a good living, and make a huge difference in the world. And I think that is the accessibility industry. The choice between for-profit and nonprofit is not a moral choice. The choice is what's the most effective way to go about this for your objectives. And often that's going to be a for-profit, but do it no matter what. Don't give up on it just because there isn't $1 billion in it.
I love hearing that. Now, did I see you got the book with you? You want to hold it up? Final
Yep, I
shot
do.
here.
I do. Here we
Let's do
go.
it.
It's
Let's
technology for
do it.
good. Yeah.
All
Unfortunately,
right.
the fuzzing algorithm and there we go. We got the angle on it. But and it's in an accessible ebook, already global certified accessible, and it goes open source in a year.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time, Jim. I always love talking with you, and we could go on for another 10 hours. But for today, we'll say goodbye and thank you to you and to SciTech Global.
SciTech Global rocks.